I found out from a stranger. A woman knocked on my door holding a paint sample fan, smiled like we were old friends, and asked if I preferred eggshell or cream for our new living room. She said her husband, my ex, had gifted her the house as a wedding present. The deed transfer had already been recorded. What my ex didn't know was that after our divorce, I'd placed a fraud alert on the property. And the county recorder had already called the DA before she'd even picked out the paint. But the woman on my porch wasn't the villain of this story. That's the part nobody expects. So, let me start from the beginning. My name is Sylvie Breaux, and I own a house on Bayou St. John in New Orleans that I have no business owning. I don't mean that legally. Legally, it's mine, paid for, documented, recorded in the Orleans Parish Conveyance Office with a chain of titles so clean you could eat off it. I mean that a woman who grew up in a shotgun double in Mid-City, whose mother worked the register at Rouse's on Carrollton, and whose father installed window units for a living, does not typically end up with a restored Creole cottage on one of the most beautiful streets in the city. But I did. And the way I got it is inseparable from the way I almost lost it, which is inseparable from the man I married when I was 24 and should have left when I was 25. The house is a four-room Creole cottage built in 1847, brick between posts construction, original cypress beams, a side gallery that faces the bayou. When I bought it in 2017, it was a wreck. The previous owner had died without heirs. The estate had been tied up in succession for 6 years, and by the time it hit the market, the roof was half gone, the gallery was sagging, and someone had stolen every piece of original hardware down to the door hinges. I bought it for $142,000 at a succession sale. Everyone thought I was out of my mind. Here's what they didn't know. I'm a historic masonry conservator. I hold a professional associate credential from the American Institute for Conservation, and I specialize in lime mortar, soft-fired brick, and plaster systems in Gulf South vernacular architecture. In English, I know how to fix old buildings that are falling apart in hot, wet places. I'd spent 8 years learning the trade, first as an apprentice with a preservation firm in Savannah, then as a contractor for the View Care Commission in the French Quarter, and finally on my own, taking private restoration jobs across southeast Louisiana. The Bayou St. John cottage wasn't a reckless purchase. It was a professional investment. I knew exactly what was wrong with it, exactly how to fix it, and exactly what it would be worth when I was done. By 2022, after 5 years of nights and weekends, relaying brick, mixing lime putty by hand, sourcing salvaged cypress from a demolition in Thibodaux, hand-forging reproduction strap hinges with a blacksmith in Breaux Bridge, the house appraised at $685,000. That house is the single largest achievement of my professional life. Every square inch of it has my hands in it. I can tell you which bricks I pulled from the original fireplace surround and reset with a hot lime mortar mix that took 3 weeks to cure. I can tell you that the gallery floor is made from heart pine salvaged from a collapsed sugar mill in St. James Parish, and that I sanded each board by hand because a power sander would have destroyed the patina. That house is not a building. It's a body of work. And my ex-husband tried to give it away like a wedding favor. Garrett Hebert and I were married for 3 years and divorced for 2, and the math of those numbers tells you everything about the ratio of good times to bad. I met Garrett at a crawfish boil in Lakeview, one of those sprawling backyard affairs where everyone's standing around a newspaper-covered table in the April heat, peeling tails and drinking Abita Amber, and the air smells like cayenne and boiled corn and something electric from the approaching thunderstorm. He was a friend of a friend's cousin. He worked in oil field services, a company man on deepwater rigs, which in South Louisiana carries a particular kind of blue-collar prestige. Good money, long hitches, the swagger of a man who works dangerous and gets paid well for it. Garrett was charming in the way that men who've spent weeks on offshore platforms can be, starved for conversation, overly attentive, making you feel like the only person at the party. He asked me about my work, and when I explained historic masonry, he didn't glaze over the way most people do. He asked follow-up questions. He seemed interested. What I learned later, what took me too long to learn, was that Garrett wasn't interested in what I did. He was interested in what I had. Specifically, the house. We married in 2019. I was 24, which is young everywhere, but especially young for making permanent legal decisions. The house was already mine. I'd bought it 2 years before we met, and it was titled solely in my name. But when we married, Garrett pushed to be added to the deed. "It's our home," he said. "We're building a life here. Why would you keep me off the title? Don't you trust me?" There it is. That question. The one that every manipulative person learns to deploy like a weapon. Don't you trust me? As if trust is something you prove by handing over legal rights. As if the only way to love someone is to make yourself vulnerable to them in writing. I said no. The first time I said no, he sulked for 2 days.
Didn't speak to me.
Left his coffee mug in the sink unwashed, which in the language of passive-aggressive marriages is basically a declaration of war. The second time, he brought it up at dinner with his mother, Charlene, who lived in a double-wide in Des Allemands and who had decided approximately 30 seconds after meeting me that I was uppity. "Garrett says you won't put him on the house," Charlene said, forking a piece of smothered pork chop like it had personally offended her. "That's not right. Husband and wife should share everything." "We share the house, Charlene. We live in it together. The deed is a legal document, not a Valentine." She looked at Garrett. "See what I mean? Uppity." Garrett's brother, Dale, was there too. Dale managed a tire shop in Bout and had the kind of deeply sunburned neck that suggested he spent most of his time under cars or in deer stands. He didn't say much, but he nodded when Charlene spoke, the way loyal sons nod, not because they agree, but because disagreeing is more expensive than silence. The third time Garrett asked, he cried. Real tears. Sitting at the kitchen table, in the kitchen with the original brick hearth I'd spent 4 months restoring, telling me he felt less than. That he felt like a tenant in his own marriage. That everyone he knew thought it was strange that his wife wouldn't share the deed. And this is where I need to be honest about the part that was my fault. I felt guilty. Not because he was right, he wasn't, but because I loved him, and watching someone you love cry is a kind of torture that bypasses logic. You don't think about property law when the person across from you is sobbing. You think about making the pain stop. So I added him to the deed. A quitclaim deed. Filed with the Orleans Parish Conveyance Office. Garrett Hebert, now a co-owner of a property he had never paid a dime toward. If you're screaming at your screen right now, I understand. I've screamed at myself plenty. My therapist, Dr. Annette Oxner on Jefferson Highway, told me it's a pattern she sees constantly, the slow erosion of boundaries through emotional pressure. It's not that you didn't know better, she said. It's that knowing better doesn't protect you from feeling worse. She was right. And I've spent the years since trying to forgive myself for being human in a situation that required me to be a machine. That's the thing about hindsight, it's always got perfect vision and zero compassion. I know now what I should have done, but I also know why I didn't. And holding both of those truths at the same time is the only honest way to tell the story. The marriage ended in 2021. Not with a dramatic blow-up, with a slow, grinding erosion like what salt air does to mortar that hasn't been properly maintained. Garrett was spending more, going out more, coming home from his hitches, and disappearing for days with friends in Metairie. The money conversations got worse. He wanted to take out a home equity loan. I refused. He wanted to sell the house and split the proceeds. I refused. It's half mine, he said one night, standing in the kitchen I'd rebuilt with my own hands, the kitchen with the original brick hearth I'd spent 4 months restoring. I'm on the deed. You're on the deed, because I put you there. You haven't paid for a single thing in this house. Doesn't matter. Louisiana law, baby. Community property. He was half right. Louisiana is a community property state. But the house was my separate property, acquired before the marriage, and the quitclaim deed was a donation, not a sale. The legal distinction matters, and I knew it mattered, because by that point I'd already consulted a lawyer. Her name was Odette Tran. She practiced family and property law out of a converted shotgun on Magazine Street, and she had the kind of calm, unblinking focus that made opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable. I'd found her through a recommendation from a colleague at the Preservation Resource Center, and she became my single best investment after the house itself. The quitclaim was a donation of separate property, Odette explained. Under Louisiana Civil Code, Article 2341, a spouse can donate separate property to the other spouse, but in a divorce, the court can consider the circumstances of the donation, including whether it was coerced or made under duress. It wasn't exactly duress, I said. It was more like attrition. Attrition is a form of duress. It just wears a nicer outfit. The divorce was finalized in November 2021. And here's the critical part. As part of the divorce settlement, Garrett was required to execute a quitclaim deed transferring his interest in the property back to me. This was negotiated, agreed upon, and ordered by the court. Judge Myrtle Reynard of the Orleans Parish Civil District Court signed the judgment. Garrett signed the quitclaim. I recorded it. The house was mine again, solely, completely legally. But Odette, who had seen enough post-divorce property fraud to fill a textbook, told me something I'll never forget. Sylvie, people don't stop being who they are just because a judge signs a paper. Put a fraud alert on the property. Call the Orleans Parish Assessor's Office and the Conveyance Office and tell them you want to be notified of any activity on this folio number. It costs you nothing and it might save you everything. I did exactly what she said. I filed owner alert notifications with both offices. I set up a property monitoring service through a title company called Crescent City Title on Poydras Street. And I moved on with my life. Or tried to. Because moving on after divorce isn't a single event. It's a daily practice, like physical therapy for an injury that healed wrong. Some days you wake up and the house feels entirely yours again, and the coffee tastes right, and the bayou is silver in the morning light, and you think, I'm okay. Other days you find a bottle of his hot sauce in the back of the cabinet, Crystal, because Garrett was a crystal man in a city of Tabasco people, which should have been a red flag, and the grief hits you sideways like a rogue wave. I threw myself into work. I took on 3 new restoration projects in 2022, a double-gallery house in the Irish Channel, a Creole townhouse in Treme, and a small but historically significant cottage in Algiers Point that had been built by a free person of color in 1836 and had survived the Civil War, Reconstruction, 2 World Wars, and Katrina, only to be threatened by a developer who wanted to demolish it for parking. I fought the demolition through the Historic District Landmarks Commission and won. That one felt personal. I was building a reputation. The New Orleans Preservation Society featured my work in their annual journal. A professor at Tulane School of Architecture invited me to guest lecture on vernacular building technologies. I was earning between $90,000 and $120,000 a year. Not wealthy, but solid.
Real.
The kind of income that comes from skill rather than speculation. And all of it was anchored to the house on Bayou St. John. My home. My proof that careful hands and stubborn patience could turn wreckage into something beautiful. Meanwhile, Garrett was doing what Garrett does, building a new stage set for a life he hadn't earned. Here's what was happening while I was moving on. Garrett, fresh off the divorce, had started dating a woman named Britt Landry within weeks of the settlement being finalized. Britt was 22 from Slidell, and from what little I knew, worked as a dental hygienist and had a genuinely sweet disposition. She wasn't the other woman. There was no affair. She simply had the misfortune of being the next person in line after me, which meant she inherited all of Garrett's charm and none of his context. They married in April 2023. Courthouse ceremony in St. Tammany Parish. I found out through a mutual friend, the way you find out everything in South Louisiana, through the invisible network of people who've known each other since 2nd grade and cannot physically resist sharing information over a plate of boudin. I didn't care about the marriage. What I cared about, though I didn't know to care about it yet, was what came next. Because Garrett told Britt that he still owned the house. Not used to own. Not had a claim to. He told her that the Bayou St. John cottage, my cottage, the one I'd pulled from the grave with my bare hands, was his. That the divorce settlement had awarded it to him. That he'd been letting his crazy ex live there temporarily out of the goodness of his heart, but that it was time to move in. And then, and this is the part that still makes my blood turn cold, he went to the Orleans Parish Conveyance Office and filed a new deed. A fraudulent deed. Transferring the property from himself to Britt Landry Hebert as a donation inter vivos, a gift between living persons. He'd forged a new quitclaim deed, listing himself as the grantor, as if the post-divorce transfer back to me had never happened. As if the court order didn't exist. As if my name, my work, my 6 years of crawling under that house and putting it back together plank by plank could just be erased with a piece of paper and a lie. The audacity of it still stuns me. Not the criminality. I'd already learned that Garrett was capable of dishonesty. But the laziness. He didn't create an elaborate scheme. He didn't hire a forger or construct a complex fraud. He simply acted as if reality didn't apply to him. As if he could file a piece of paper and the entire documented history of the property, the chain of title, the court order, my name in the public record, would just evaporate. He treated the legal system the way he treated our marriage, as something he could rearrange to suit himself. Consequences be damned. It's a particular kind of entitlement. The kind that doesn't even register what it's taking because it never considered that other people's ownership was real in the first place. Here's what Garrett didn't understand about the conveyance office, and what most people don't understand about property records in Louisiana. The Orleans Parish Conveyance Office is one of the oldest continuous land record systems in the United States. It operates under the Napoleonic civil law tradition, and every document filed there is reviewed by a team of clerks and attorneys who examine the chain of title with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that would make an archivist weep with joy. When Garrett filed his fraudulent deed, it didn't just slide into the system unnoticed. It triggered the owner alert I'd placed 2 years earlier. And it landed on the desk of a deputy recorder named Augustine Foray, who took one look at the chain of title, saw the post-divorce quitclaim clearly recorded, saw that the property was solely in my name, and saw that Garrett was purporting to transfer a property he did not own, and flagged it immediately. Augustine didn't just flag it internally. He flagged it to the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office. Because filing a fraudulent deed in Louisiana isn't a civil matter. It's a criminal one. Under Louisiana Revised Statute 14:132, filing a false public record is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And here's the detail that makes me believe in the existence of poetic justice, or at least competent bureaucracy. Augustine Foray later told Odette that when he pulled up the chain of title and saw the fraudulent deed, he actually said out loud in his office to no one, "This guy can't be serious." All of this happened before Britt Landry knocked on my door with her paint samples. I just didn't know it yet. The systems I'd put in place, the fraud alerts, the monitoring, the careful documentation that Odette had insisted on, were already working. Silently. Automatically. Like a well-laid foundation doing exactly what it was designed to do. October 14th, 2023. A Saturday. I was on the gallery, drinking café au lait from a chipped mug I'd bought at the Frenchman Art Market years ago, watching a blue heron stand motionless in the bayou shallows the way they do, like a meditation teacher who's completely given up on you and is just vibing alone. A white Nissan Rogue pulled up. A young woman got out. Blonde ponytail, denim jacket, paint sample fan in her hand like a tiny accordion of possibilities. She walked up the front steps with the nervous energy of someone who's about to do something exciting and has no idea they're about to do something terrible. "Hi. Are you Sylvie?" "I am." "Oh my God, hi. I'm Britt, Garrett's wife." She said it brightly, like she was introducing herself at a block party. "He said you'd be here. I wanted to come by and talk about the transition. He said you'd be moving out by the end of the month." I set my coffee down. "The transition?" I repeated. "Yeah. He gifted me the house. As a wedding present. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I almost cried when he told me. A house on Bayou St. John." She held up the paint samples. "I was thinking eggshell for the living room, but do you think cream would be warmer? I don't want to change too much. The brick is so gorgeous. Did you do the restoration yourself?" That last question hit me somewhere between my ribs. Did you do the restoration yourself? Yes. Every brick. Every board. Every late night mixing lime putty until my hands cracked and bled. Every argument with Garrett about whether any of it mattered. Every morning waking up in a house that was falling apart and choosing to put it back together. "Britt," I said carefully, "who told you this house belongs to Garrett?" "He did. He showed me the deed. It's all official. Can I see it? She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of the fraudulent quitclaim deed. There it was, Garrett's name as grantor, Britt's name as grantee, my house's folio number, and a notarization from someone whose name I didn't recognize. Britt, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me clearly. This house is mine. It's been solely in my name since November 2021, when a court ordered Garrett to transfer his interest back to me as part of our divorce. What he showed you is a forged document. Her face went through about 6 emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, the beginning of anger, directed at me, because I was the one saying the words. Then a flicker of something else. Something that looked like recognition. Like a pattern she'd seen before, but hadn't wanted to name. That can't be right, he said. I know what he said. I was married to him, too.
She sat down on the gallery step.
The paint samples fell from her hand and fanned out across the heart pine floor like a tiny, useless rainbow. Have you ever watched someone realize they've been lied to? Not a small lie, a structural one. A lie that was load-bearing, that held up the whole architecture of their new life. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the sound of someone breathing and trying to figure out which parts of their reality are still standing. Britt sat on my porch for 40 minutes. I brought her a glass of water, then a cup of coffee when the water wasn't enough. I showed her the recorded deed, the real one, the one with my name, dated November 2021. I showed her the divorce judgment. I showed her the property monitoring alert that had been triggered when Garrett filed his fraudulent deed. She read each document slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into a different story. He told me you were difficult, she said quietly. That you'd been vindictive during the divorce. That you'd tried to take things that weren't yours. I know. He told his lawyer the same thing. He told his mother. He told anyone who'd listen. That's what people like Garrett do. They build the narrative before they build the crime, so that when the crime comes, everyone's already predisposed to blame the victim. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid. You trusted someone. That's not a character flaw. That's what normal people do. The flaw is in the person who exploits it. She looked at me with wet eyes. Did you trust him too? I put him on the deed of my house because he asked me enough times that I got tired of saying no.
So yeah.
I trusted him. And then I had to spend 18 months and $14,000 in legal fees on trusting him. A laugh escaped her. Small, broken, surprised. The kind of laugh that comes out when crying would be too expected. The kind that says, I'm not okay, but I'm still here. What happens now? She asked. Honestly, I think the DA's office is already involved. The county recorder flagged the filing. Her face went white. He could go to jail? He filed a forged legal document to transfer a property he doesn't own. In Louisiana, that's a felony. Britt Landry stared at the bayou. The heron was still there, still perfectly still, still unbothered by the catastrophic unraveling of human plans happening 30 feet away. I've been married for 6 months, she said. I know. He seemed so. She trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence.
She didn't need to.
I'd started that sentence 100 times myself and never found the right ending either. Here's where the story splits into 2 tracks, and I want to follow both. Track 1. The legal consequences. Odette Tran filed an emergency motion to have the fraudulent deed declared null and void. This was essentially a formality. The chain of title was unambiguous, the post-divorce quitclaim was recorded, and Garrett had no legal interest in the property to transfer. Judge Reynard, the same judge who'd handled our divorce, signed the order invalidating the fraudulent deed within 2 weeks. The criminal side moved slower but harder. The Orleans Parish DA charged Garrett with filing or maintaining false public records under RS 14:132 and forgery under RS 14 hours 72 minutes. Combined, he was facing up to 15 years. His attorney, a guy from Kenner, who I suspect Garrett was paying in installments, tried to argue that Garrett had been confused about the property status post-divorce. That he genuinely believed the house was still partially his. That it was a misunderstanding. Augustine Faure, The deputy recorder, who'd flagged the filing, provided a statement noting that the chain of title was clear and that Garrett had filed the fraudulent deed using a notarized document from a notary whose commission had been expired for 3 years. The notary, it turned out, was a friend of Garrett's from the rig, a guy who'd let his commission lapse in 2020 but still had his stamp. Confused people don't seek out expired notaries to stamp forged documents. That's not confusion. That's planning. As of the time I'm telling you this, the criminal case is still working its way through the system. Garrett's attorney is pushing for a plea deal. I expect he'll get one. Probably a suspended sentence and probation because the system is imperfect and overwhelmed, and nonviolent property crimes rarely get the sentences they deserve. But the felony charge, if it sticks, will follow him. And in the oil field, where companies run background checks before letting you near a platform, a forgery conviction is a career-ending event. Track 2. Britt. 3 weeks after she showed up on my porch with paint samples, Britt filed for annulment. Under Louisiana law, a marriage can be annulled if it was procured through fraud, and a husband who gifts his wife a house he stole from his ex-wife is, I think we can all agree, operating under fraudulent pretenses. She texted me once, about a month later. Short, no punctuation, the way people text when they're trying to keep things contained. Asterisk, thank you for being honest with me that day. I know you didn't have to be asterisk. I wrote back. Asterisk, you showed up at my house with paint samples and good intentions. You didn't deserve what happened any more than I did. Asterisk. She sent back a single emoji, one of those tiny hands making a heart. And that was that. I think about Britt sometimes. Not with resentment. I never resented her. She was a 23-year-old woman who believed her husband when he said he was giving her a home. The cruelty was never hers. She was just the next person standing in the blast radius of a man who treats other people's lives like things he can rearrange. There's a footnote to the family side of the story that I should tell because it's the part that surprised me most, and the part that reminds me that people are more complicated than the worst thing they've enabled. 2 weeks after the charges were filed, Charlene, Garrett's mother, the woman who called me uppity over smothered pork chops, who nodded along while her son pressured me about the deed, showed up at my house. Unannounced. She pulled into my driveway in her old Ford Ranger with a faded LSU sticker on the bumper, sat in the truck for a full 5 minutes with the engine running, and then walked up to the gallery like she was approaching a church confessional. I came to say something, she said. I waited. I knew Garrett had money problems. I knew he wasn't treating you right about the house. During your marriage. I should have said something. Why didn't you? She looked out at the bayou. Her jaw was working the way people's jaws work when they're trying to hold words in and let them out at the same time. Because he's my son. And I thought if I took your side, I'd lose him.
She paused.
Turns out I lost him anyway. I didn't know what to say to that. There's no script for the moment your ex-mother-in-law admits she watched you get hurt and chose silence. No perfect response that covers both the anger and the pity and the grudging respect for a woman who drove 45 minutes to say something she didn't have to say. You want some coffee? I asked. She stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about Garrett. She told me about her garden. She was growing mirlitones on a trellis she'd built from old pallet wood, and she couldn't get them to fruit. I told her about pollination timing and the importance of hand-pollinating if the bees weren't cooperating. She looked at me like I'd given her the secret to cold fusion. You know about gardening too? She said. I know about things that grow, I said. It's kind of a whole job. She left with a handshake that turned into something that wasn't quite a hug but was closer than anything we'd shared in 5 years. I watched her truck pull away, and I thought about how damage works. How it radiates outward from the point of impact, touching people who didn't cause it and couldn't prevent it. Garrett's choices hadn't just hurt me and Britt. They'd hurt his own mother. They'd cracked the foundation of every relationship he had. Portland cement. Every time. There's a concept in masonry preservation called sympathetic repair. It means you fix old buildings using materials and methods that are compatible with the original construction. Not faster, not cheaper, but right. You use lime mortar, not Portland cement. You use soft brick, not hard. You match the texture, the color, the composition. Because if you use the wrong material, It doesn't just fail to fix the problem, it actively makes it worse. Hard cement against soft brick will crack the brick. The repair becomes the damage. I think about that with people, too. About how the wrong kind of strength, the coercive kind, the taking kind, doesn't just fail to hold things together. It breaks what was already there. Garrett was Portland cement. Hard, rigid, incompatible. And everything he touched, he cracked. The house is still mine. It will stay mine. I've since updated every protection available: homestead exemption, property fraud alerts, title lock monitoring, and a standing instruction with Odette Tran's office to be notified of anything at all, that touches my property records. Last month, I finished a new project: the restoration of a side-haul shotgun on Esplanade Avenue for a client who'd inherited it from her great-aunt. The house had been through Katrina and 2 subsequent floods, and the plaster was so water-damaged that it came off the walls in sheets, like sunburned skin. I spent 3 months replastering with a traditional lime and horsehair mix, and when the client saw the finished walls, smooth, warm, glowing in the late afternoon light the way only lime plaster can, she started crying. "It looks like it did when I was a little girl," she said. That's the job. Not making things new, making them themselves again. I drove home along Esplanade, turned onto Moss Street, and parked in front of my house on the bayou. The sun was going down, and the light was doing that thing it does in New Orleans in autumn, turning everything gold and amber and slightly unreal, like the city is remembering itself. I sat on the gallery. The same gallery where Britt had sat with her paint samples. The same gallery where I'd drunk 1,000 cups of coffee and fought 100 silent battles and decided, again and again, that this house was worth the trouble. The heron was back in the bayou. Or a different heron. They all look the same, ancient and patient, and completely indifferent to the dramas of people who live in houses instead of marshes. I thought about Garrett. Not with anger. The anger had burned out months ago, replaced by something flatter and more permanent. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like completion. The way a restoration is complete. You don't forget the damage. You just build past it. And I thought about Britt's paint samples, scattered across my porch floor that October morning. Eggshell or cream? Such a small, hopeful question. The kind of question you only ask when you believe the future is something you get to choose. She'll choose again. Somewhere else, in a house that's actually hers, with a partner who doesn't confuse possession with love. And I'll stay here, on the bayou, in the house I built with my own hands and defended with my own name. In the house that an 1847 builder put together with cypress and brick and the stubborn faith that something made well could outlast anything done to it. I found something last month while I was repointing a section of the exterior brick. Behind a piece of deteriorated mortar, tucked into the joint between 2 bricks, was a small glass medicine bottle. Cobalt blue, maybe 2 inches tall, with no label. It had been placed there deliberately, an old builder's tradition, a kind of time capsule or good luck charm, hidden in the walls for whoever came next. I held it up to the light. The blue glass caught the sun and threw a tiny cobalt shadow across my hand. And I thought about the person who put it there. 1847, before the Civil War, before electricity, before everything we think of as modern. Someone stood at this wall and pressed a small blue bottle into the mortar and thought, asterisk, may this house stand. May whoever lives here be safe, asterisk. 176 years later, here I am. Not safe from everything, nobody is safe from everything, but standing on solid ground in a house that held. So far, he's been right. Asterisk, there's something I've learned from old houses that I wish someone had told me before my first marriage. The foundation tells you everything. You can paint the walls, replace the fixtures, hang new curtains, but if the foundation is compromised, none of it matters. The whole thing will shift, crack, and eventually fall. Asterisk. Asterisk, Garrett looked good on the surface. New paint. Nice fixtures. But his foundation was rotten, and I spent years trying to repair something that was never structurally sound. Asterisk. Asterisk, now I check foundations first. In houses. In people. In every promise anyone makes me. Asterisk. Asterisk, not because I'm cynical. Because I'm careful. There's a difference. Cynicism says nothing is worth trusting. Careful says some things are, but you verify. You check the mortar. You test the bearing walls. You don't skip the inspection just because the paint looks fresh. Asterisk. Asterisk and my own foundation? Brick and lime and cypress, set in 1847, repaired by hand in 2017, and still holding. Asterisk. Asterisk the bayou changes every day. The water rises and falls. The herons come and go. The light shifts. But the house stays. Not because it's invulnerable. It's survived storms and floods and termites and one man who tried to give it away like it was his to give. It stays because someone a long time ago built it right. And because someone else, me, chose to keep it standing. Asterisk. Asterisk, that's not a metaphor. That's just what happened. Asterisk. Asterisk, some things are built to last. You just have to be willing to do the work. Asterisk.